Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to our first official episode of ECC Essentials. If you were with us 2 weeks ago, Nathan and I did a kickoff, and I'm excited to dive into the different topics that we'll be covering in this series. For anyone who doesn't know, I am Halcyon Frank. I am the Director of Training and Development with the Denise Amberly Foundation. As some of you might know, we have just like this little small event coming up next week. It's just like a conference. It's not a big deal. But we are in our last kind of preparation in Florida before we head to South Carolina. So if you hear noises behind me and it sounds like muted chaos, that is why. We're trying to get some things done. But I'm excited to have Chris here with me, so I will let her introduce herself.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Nichols, and I am a CTO and a telecommunicator at my center in a consolidated PSAP in Southwest Virginia. And I have recently taken on another venture as an assistant online course director. I'm a director, instructor for Denise Amberly Foundation. And I'm actually really excited to be here today and discuss some adult learning basics with Halcyon.
Yes, should be a good time. Feel free, as some of you chat if you're watching this live, where you're tuning in from. As some of you may know, after this is done, we will upload it so you can catch the replay, but also the audio version. We'll be putting it up on the major podcast platforms so you can easily listen to it on your commute or whenever it is convenient for you. So we will go ahead and get started. We're kind of going back to basics today. So we're really just going to be talking about the adult learning assumptions, or you may know them as principles. And these were introduced by Malcolm Knowles, this adult learning theory. And we're just going to break each one of those down and then talk about how that works in the center and what that looks like when we're applying that into our training programs. Click the next screen there. There we go.
I don't know. Okay, I thought I lost the screen, but I'm good. So his first principle is adult learners have self-concept, which basically means that adults obviously are no longer children. They're autonomous beings. When you're a child, you're very dependent on what you're learning, but when you turn into an adult, it's very independent. You have control. You want to be there. You want to do these things. And it's just the shift from being told to do something to want to do it yourself. And that's something you have to make sure that you're focusing on when teaching an adult, and being on their level, because they do want to be there and they're choosing to be there and they're choosing to learn the material that you're giving them.
Yeah, I think we all know, and you don't have to name names if you're watching live in the chat by any means. But it applies to learning and just in general, right? Like as adults, we don't want to be micromanaged. We want to have a say and some control in it. So this definitely applies in training. And so when you're looking at your training program, when you can allow for some independence, some independent work time, letting them maybe choose the activities that they're going to do to practice. I don't know if there's anything you use specifically, Chris, to kind of allow for some independence with your trainees.
I've started to let my trainees, because back in the day, I'd give them all of my resources that I had done perfectly myself. And I was like, oh, this is great because this is exactly what I needed. And then once I started realizing that, not everybody really cares how I did it. It's normally just giving them the information, letting them process it the way they need to process it. And I've had, people do like Canva notes or make their own flashcards or do the Quizlets and everything. So that's kind of how I've started to let them have their own independence. And I've really seen a difference in my training over the past few years on, instead of just handing everybody my stuff that's already packaged in a small bow, versus letting them do it themselves and kind of working through it themselves, which I think at the end, it makes it easier on them.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. I think we all have our own unique style, of how we want to take notes, what our approach is, which kind of goes into the next assumption, which is the adult learner experience. So, when we start school as little kids, we know what Paw Patrol taught us and not to touch hot things and maybe. But as adults, we bring in so much more experience. And we were talking about this ahead of time, Chris, of even for us, like we are guilty sometimes of looking at new people and being like, well, you've never worked in dispatch, so you don't know. Like, how could you possibly know how to do anything or how anything works because you've never done this job before? Which is entirely untrue. Like, there's a lot of our job you don't know until you're in it.
Right. But I think it's also the breaking like that stigma or that toxic, oh, it was really hard for me, it's gonna be hard for you. And when you're a new dispatcher, you can get sucked into that. So when you go to look at a new person, oh, well, I didn't know anything, so you don't know anything either. And it's a really bad hole to fall into. And I know I did back in the day. And thankfully, I crawled myself out of that.
Yeah, and it's a really like, if any of us think back to sometimes somebody's like discredit our experience or like acts like we don't know anything, even just as adults, I think our general reaction is to like disengage. And we're like, okay, well, fine. Like, I'm not going to
keep proving myself to you over and over again if you don't think I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And if you're going to like continue to talk to me like I don't know, or that like I'm a child or something like that, they're going to disengage and not want to learn anything you teach them. Which also too, when somebody's disengaged, especially early on in training, like it is so much work to try to get them back, because instead of like having kind of a clean slate, if you will, you now are to the point where you have to work like twice as hard for them to want to listen to you.
Yep. And I remember when I've been going on this like big self journey lately, and a lot of it is in training. But I remember specifically with this one for the learning experience, that part of your job as a trainer is to make all those connections of all of their previous jobs. And so I've started like, tell me about a day-to-day, or what did you used to do at your old job? And then as they go through it, you're like, oh, okay, well, take what you did at this vet's clinic and then change it around a little bit. And this is kind of what we do for here. And I've noticed that that's kind of helped them get like, okay, well, I didn't think I had that skill, but I actually do have that skill. Now I have to tweak it a little bit and apply it to dispatching. And I've started to do it like just normal, even just kind of talking to people like not new hires, but people coming in wanting to interview for our job that have never even heard of dispatch. They have no idea what it is. And just having those conversations with them like, oh yeah, okay, you know how to run this, you know how to do this, you know how to do this. Just change your mindset a little bit and apply it to dispatch.
Yeah. And I think that so much of what we do, whether or not we want to label it customer service, because it is a little different, knowing how to talk to people. So especially if you have somebody come in who has a lot of customer service where they've talked to people in a lot of different situations. I started in banking, and it wasn't life or death per se, but if somebody thought you messed up their money or their money or lost their money, like, one, it was life or death to them. And two, they were not happy about it.
No.
So those kind of skills, like definitely translate. And again, for anyone watching live, like feel free to put in the chat if this is anything you've ever experienced, or, if you learn anything similar or have run into obstacles related to these things kind of as we go through them. But it's just very important to acknowledge what your new employees are bringing into your center.
Absolutely.
Because they will not like it and not be happy if you just act like they don't know anything.
Well,
none of us.
I've noticed too, because I've had, and this is an entirely different session you can focus on for generational gaps, but I myself have trained people that were 15 to 20 years older than me. And yes, I knew 99% more about dispatching than they knew, but they had been in the workforce almost half my life. And in the beginning, it was hard for me to bridge that gap to make sure we were on the same page, because in my mind, I was like, okay, well, this is only about dispatching and I have to only focus on dispatching. And it was such a detrimental mistake on my part. And now that I've gotten older and I've done training longer, I can look at someone who might be 30 years older than me and way more experience in the workforce and kind of bridge it to where we're on the same page.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge topic too. Like, we could do it a later session.
We'll pin it.
Because it's a big, big topic. Okay, going on. Readiness to learn. What you got on that one?
So for me, I remember that when I was kind of studying these on my own too, the big thing that I took away is for readiness to learn isn't really, when you're a kid, you're learning kind of like for the sake of learning, maybe some things that they're relevant, but they're not super relevant. But for this one is like, you're pretty much being hired and you need to learn how to do the job you were just hired to do. So this isn't just, I'm just going to learn things for the fun of it. No, there's a reason why you're learning this. And adults are very much like that, unless you have infinite amount of time. And there are some things in adult life where you're just like, I really want to learn about basket weaving. So you just do that on the side. But for the most part, if you're an adult trying to learn something, it's because of something. Oh, my sink broke. My lawnmower ran out of gas, or I have to learn how to take this 911 call because now that's my job. So, and as long as you're aware of that as an adult teaching another adult, they want to be here and they need to learn this stuff versus this isn't really like a hobby. This is something that they're supposed to be doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, we have to show them like, and this will kind of come up again as we go through these other ones. Adults,
right? They're all very similar.
Why do I need to know this? And so we have to make sure that they understand, like, you're going to use this almost immediately. This is going to solve an issue, or this is going to, whatever we need that to be. Because whereas adults, we want to know why. What is this going to solve? Gary in the chat said, my biggest issue is seeing the difference between true disengagement versus just being so nervous they are not engaged, or so new, they are not engaging because they're nervous. And I think those are very true, but they are different. So how, can we tell the difference? I think that's a good question.
I feel like that's a dissertation in itself. It's like figuring that, because even I struggle with that sometimes, because then you back it on yourself. Like, oh, what if I said something? What if I'm not training them the way they need to be trained? Or what if I'm not giving them what they need? And that's why they're disassociating or disengaging. And meanwhile, they could just be like, I really have to pee, but I don't want to ask to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, you just are awkward and you're like, I want to know this job, but I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's tough. But two, kind of it is something then we have to worry about, or not worry about, but make sure that we're paying attention to what we're doing. So that way we are not acknowledging their experience and making them disengage, but then just assuming, oh, it must be because they're new and they're nervous.
Yeah. And I mean, that also boils down to having the open, clear communication between trainer and trainee. And I think that's going to be, for most people, that's probably a lifelong struggle, whether you're in work or your personal life. Everybody could do better at being more open and honest with how you feel in the moment you're feeling it.
Oh yeah, we're not good at clear communications and honesty.
No. I remember though, in reference to the readiness, I was trying to explain to some negative effects of, or the downside of training sometimes. And I was trying to explain it once to somebody in my life. I can't remember, but I was like, imagine being told, go turn on that light switch, and you turn on the light switch and the light turns on. Well, that touching that, doing the button, this light pops on, but you're never really told, if you flip the switch, that light goes on, and the light goes on because we need light in the room. And then if you turn it off, the light goes down. And I think sometimes a lot of that can happen in dispatch, or, a lot of places, but specifically dispatch, where it's like, you press that button and talk. And it's like, okay, but why? Okay, well, that's because somebody called, or an officer radioed in. You need to press this button. It's this right here. This is the radio console. This is the channel that we're working on. And I think, and so some people would be totally fine being told just to press that button and move on. But the majority of people, in my experience, and especially me, I want to know why I'm pressing that button. I want to know how that button works. What would happen if I didn't press the button? What would happen if I pressed the button to the left? And that's when you start kind of going through all of that to actually break it down and explain to somebody, we hired you to do this job, and you do X, Y, and Z in order to do A, B, C, and we're going to teach you how to do it. Because if you don't do it, and then you go through all the repercussions of why, if you didn't do it right, or if you didn't do it at all.
Yeah. And there's Chris said body language will tell you if they're willing to learn. They can be nervous, but actively reading and practicing the manuals versus the ones that just sit there inactive and disconnected. And I think that's a very good point too. Definitely, if somebody's reading, but maybe isn't asking a lot of questions versus they're just like looking around the room and what is everybody else doing can be an indicator of, how engaged they are, versus, if it's nerves or they're just disconnected. We've got some good comments coming in. Jamie, how do you respond when a trainee appears to have a lack of care? They were not concerned about their DORs or daily scores. Kind of let you start that one, Chris.
I think, to me, DORs can be such a scary and confusing piece of paper. And unless there are not clear expectations and explanations on why things are the way they are, seeing something slightly negative could make someone kind of shut down and act like they don't care, because that's like a massive defense mechanism. Every single one of us have done that. Shut down the minute we hear something negative. So I've gotten to the point where I am very, very clear on, this is the DOR. These are all of these things. If it happens to appear to be negative, we'll talk it over and you tell me if you saw it differently, or I'll tell you my opinion and we'll move on from there. But that's like, and there are some people that truly don't care, and that's a bigger issue that you have to, eventually get your admin involved in everything. But I've noticed for myself, a new person, if they see something that may not be good, or they automatically don't get an exceptional on that DOR,
right,
they may just shut down.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And again, like, sometimes I feel bad because, like, you have to have a conversation, you have to talk about it, and people are like, oh, I'm having a conversation. I'm like, and you very well could be, it doesn't mean that you're not, or like that's the end all be all, but sometimes it is kind of, do you understand like what all these mean? Like, are you kind of disconnecting because you're frustrated at what your score is, or, do you disagree with this? Might be part of it. Definitely one of those questions where I feel like if I could give a good answer that just solved all the problems, like,
right,
book and retire, like it would be super easy.
We take the show on the road.
Yeah, like it would be great. But yeah, even just conversation too, and as much as like it is something too to document, and you can't say like, oh, trainee didn't care,
right? Because that's totally subjective. And your opinion,
right? You really have to figure out how to be specific and say, explain scoring to trainee. They did not give any verbal acknowledgement, physically turned away, kind of really keying into what it is that, you're looking at that makes you think like, I don't know that they really care about this. Or asking, like, do you disagree, have a problem, and documenting that they didn't respond, or that, yes, they said they did have an issue, discuss. So it's a very good question. It can get very tricky. But kind of going into orientational learning, which again, these three all kind of
they do. Yeah.
So it all kind of goes back to the why, knowing why it's relevant. How does this affect my job? What does this look like? And like the need to know, why do I need to know this versus what's good information that I want to know? And you kind of touched on it too with, when we are going to school, we have to learn these things to like take a test and pass and get our grade and graduate, versus when you're an adult, there's no end to it. There's no learning to take a test. It's to do your job.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I lost my train of thought, but yes, I had something and it left.
Happens to me all the time. And then lastly, just as we wind down here, motivation to learn. A lot of times we will hear that like people like money, and that again is its own conversation. But we do have to look, and adults are actually more motivated intrinsically. As much as we want to say it's the pay, it's the benefits, it's actually those intrinsic things that are going to help motivate your learners.
Yeah. And that's, and I found out from myself, like one of the reasons why I continue to stay in this job is I feel motivated by all the trust that's given to me by my admin, my coworkers, the law enforcement, the EMS, that people trust me so much that I can sit there every day and they know that I have their backs, or they know that I'm going to get them to the end of the day safe and sound. And that's one of the, and I have all these other motivations in my life, but that one's kind of the big one when it comes to specifically working. And that's not everybody, everybody has their own different one, but for me, it's always that. And it is, adults aren't, no one is really forced. I'm sure there are some people, so I guess I can't say no one, but people typically aren't forced to be in a specific job. There is a reason they picked this job, and there is a reason they're here, because they do want to be here. Nobody really forces somebody to. I'm sure you can probably argue that people feel like they're forced.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, but especially nowadays with the job market the way it is, it's
people
kind
have
of
a lot of choices.
Yeah, it's double-edged, not double-edged sword, but it kind of speaks to both sides. One, they're not necessarily forced because they could potentially go get a job, but also for us, we do need to make sure we're putting in the effort and taking the extra steps to apply these adult learning assumptions, because they could just go get another job. And just because someone goes, I don't like it here, I'm going to go get another job, doesn't mean that they weren't in it. It doesn't mean that they didn't want to do the job. But if they're not treated right, then I don't blame them for walking away.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot blame somebody. And I've seen it in the past, not just in dispatching. Everybody's had that conversation with their best friend. Oh, you don't need this job. You can find something else. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I like what Joseph just said too. In the chat. Sometimes the trainer may not have the best explanation. The other dispatcher's supervisor may have a better way to explain it. Doesn't hurt to use other resources. Just really quickly, as we wrap up, I think that's very true. And I think sometimes as trainers, we feel like, oh, we're not doing something right, or because other employees may overstep, and we're like, hey, we're the trainer, but it doesn't mean we can't reach out. It doesn't mean that if that new person connects with another person, we can't utilize them in a way, because maybe they can deliver a message that we are not seeming to get across.
Yeah, I work in a consolidated center, so at any given time, I can have 6 or 7 coworkers beside me, and I utilize everybody. If there's something that I don't know, I would much rather get you to somebody that does than tell you the wrong answer, and then it'd be potentially terrible.
Yeah, it's just use what you have. And one thing, I keep saying one more thing, one last thing.
And another thing.
Excuse me. And another thing. There's another comment. If I have a 19-year-old, telling her from the start she will mess up and is okay has made a difference in her. And I think that's so very true. Along with all of these things we've talked about, making sure we're setting people up to know that it's going to get tough. It's going to be frustrating. You're going to make mistakes, but also this is training. So make them all now. Because that's the time to make them.
But you know what? Being a trainer keeps you humble, because you'll make some kind of mistake and be like,
it really does. Yeah. And then really quickly, I just wanted to share, last week I was at Nina Standard's Best Practice Conference, and in the session on the quality assurance, and Eric Perry is actually one of the board members for the Denise Samerly Foundation. He put this up, and I think these are very important. So they go along with what we've talked about, but also if you're looking at your training program and what do you need to include, what kind of activities should you have, reinforcement, anything like that. Every worker has 4 basic questions. So what do I need to do? How do I do it? How well does it need to be done? And how will I know I'm doing it well? And these, again, all tie back to these assumptions. They want to know the why. They want to know what it is they need to do. What level do they need to perform to? And then how are they going to know if they're doing it well? So I wanted to include those just because I think that's a good thing to think about. Again, as you think about your training program.
I like those.
Yeah. And then lastly, we will wrap this up. Again, the ECC Essentials, we want to make sure that these are kind of that bite-sized learning, if you will, 20 to 30 minutes. So that way, when you do listen to that audio version, you don't have to invest too much time. You can go back to your true crime podcast. We won't take up that much time. But really quickly, right now, as of January 26th, we are doing a Telecommunicator Week t-shirt contest. Anybody can submit their designs. And last day to submit will be February 3rd. After that, we will put those up to a vote, and then the top 2 designs will be available for purchase in time to have them for Dispatch Week this year. And if you get the winning design, you get a free t-shirt. So I will try to put that link in the chat as well for anyone watching live.
Have you submitted? That's the question.
Oh, I'm letting everybody else do their ideas. But I'm really excited about it. I think it'll be a good time. It's fun to see like everybody's creativity, because although we're like dispatchers and public safety, like there's people who have, some creative muscles.
Yeah.
So I will throw that link for anyone watching live. And then last but not least, if you have any questions for myself or Chris, feel free to reach out to either of us. The emails are on the screen. Chris will be knichols@deniseamberly.org. And then I am halcyon@deniseamberly.org. And to find out about future episodes or anything related to the ECC Essentials, be sure to follow us on Facebook as well to keep up to date. And that's where we'll be posting information on our next episode. So kind of picked a topic. We could talk all day about it. So that was
really could.
Sped right through it. But thank you for anyone listening. Those who have attended live, had some great conversation in the chat as well as in the session with Chris and myself. But we look forward to seeing you guys next time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.